Hi, in this video I'm going to be talking more about the philosophy of autodidacticism, and in particularly I want to start with discussing its relationship to self-directed learning and how self-directed learning really initiates the philosophy and our understanding of the autodidact. And in particular, this is because the autodidacticism has to do with self-direction and really guiding the self and developing greater self-intelligence that primarily occurs through self-directed learning. And one way that we can engage this is through DIY states or DIY behaviors and activities. And what DIY is it's do it yourself, and you may have encountered DIY in many different ways in your life, but it very much is something that everybody can access, and that again is part of this self-directed learning and is initiated by the self and really requires a process of developing self-knowledge that facilitates self-intelligence, often through this self-direction. And these are all interconnected and related, but they have different components and ways of manifesting themselves. And the way we might approach a DIY project can be very, very different in the way it manifests itself. And what really separates the autodidactic philosophy from self-directed learning in a DIY approach is it has an underlying philosophy and set of perceptions, motivations, emotions, feelings, actions, and behaviors that are formalized in regards to how an individual perceives themselves, their will and their willingness to engage in greater self-development and to really direct themselves in a positive way and to become more self-sufficient and self-sustaining in particular, rather than relying on others. And it's a lot of it's predicated on individuality, as well as this concept of individuation, which requires us to develop our own self-knowledge and our own understanding alongside others and alongside the communities that we develop in our independent developmental trajectory. So autodidacticism is much more focused on a sense of self-mastery and cultivating self-intelligence, and formalizing that into a particular philosophy and ethos of how we approach stuff. And it's ultimately about deepening one's connection and exploration of the self, coming to know thyself in a deeper way through a particular pathway of self-direction, self-learning, and a DIY ethic that can manifest itself in various ways. So just to give an example of how DIY is a little bit different than autodidacticism, you can engage, say, in a project that you've been inspired by, that you typically go out and maybe you purchase a particular service, and then you decide to recreate that service or to do it yourself. So in this case, maybe it's a hamburger. You're creating a hamburger from scratch, and typically you just go to McDonald's or you go to a place where you can sort of build your own burger. So they have like the meat patties and the tomato and the lettuce and the ketchup and the mustard, but you kind of decide that what you want to do is you want to do everything from scratch. So what you do is you get a big chunk of meat, you grind it up, you salt and pepper it, maybe you add some cream or a little bit of olive oil to get it to stick together, and you create your own beef patties. And then you cook your own dough from the flour, the wheat, you bake your own buns, and then you start to set up your ingredients, your raw ingredients. Maybe you have a little garden in your backyard, and you go and you see your garden, you see some tomatoes, you grab a tomato, you cut a couple of slices of tomato, and maybe you have some lettuce that's in your garden, so you pluck some leaves of lettuce, you prepare your lettuce, you have some onion already in your garden as well, so you cut up your onion, and there you go, you created a burger. You did it all yourself from these basic components and fundamental ingredients. And this is an instance in where we're engaging in a DIY ethic, but we can also break this down and look at the many layers in which there's self-sufficiency in here that supports more of this autodidactic trajectory. You know, if you have your own garden and you grow your own food, you're supplying yourself your own resources, and whether or not you're particularly willing that in a certain direction, so whether or not it was your desire to be self-sufficient is really ultimately going to be what is going to determine whether or not you're developing here an autodidactic philosophy or whether or not you're just sort of self-sufficient. Because if your goal is to primarily increase your self-sufficiency and to develop yourself through these practices, this is where we're going to start seeing us move towards that autodidactic trajectory. But if the goal was just to originally have a garden and that it's nice and that it provides food, and the self-sufficiency sort of came after a fact, it's more about you have that self-sufficiency and the autodidacticism is implicit in what you're doing, but there's no explicit autodidactic philosophy until we start to really combine the self-directed learning with the self-sufficiency element and the DIY burger. Because typically, you know, when it comes to how you're making your burger, previously you were just going out and buying it and that was sort of automated away. But when you decided to go make that burger yourself and make it through your own ingredients, you've engaged in more of an autodidactic, autotilic process that allows you to direct your own courses of perceptions, motivations, emotions, feelings, actions, and behaviors, and ultimately shape your personality in this trajectory that has more of these levels of self-development that facilitate greater self-knowledge and self-awareness, cultivating greater self-intelligence, rather than just having one component such as self-sufficiency or engaging in an activity that's DIY or self-directed learning. So autodidacticism really integrates all of these elements into one consolatory element. And that's all I wanted to say for this video, so I hope you enjoyed it.